Washington Journal continues.
Welcome back. In this week's Spotlight on Magazines, Chelsea Barabas is with us to talk about her recent article appearing in Democracy Journal. It's about big data in the U.S. and how the relationship between workers and technology is changing. Thanks so much for being with us.
Hi, glad to be here.
When people think of technology transforming the workplace, they so often think of automation, but you write that big data is really driving power shifts too. Explain how.
Sure, yeah. As you mentioned, a lot of the conversation around artificial intelligence and its impact on the workforce has really been around the role it's going to play in automating, all kinds of jobs in the workforce. But, a much less kind of talked about aspect of this is really in thinking about the role that artificial intelligence is going to play in decisions about opportunities that are available to you in the workforce. So a lot of my research has looked at the growing amounts of data that's being used during hiring and recruitment for jobs, as well as kind of evaluating people's performance in the workplace to inform decisions about promotion and things like that. Some people think that this, in many ways, could be an opportunity for us to address a lot of the long-standing biases that we've seen in the workforce around certain groups of people, women, people of color, being, denied certain opportunities because of, implicit forms of bias in hiring, recruitment, promotion, things like that. But there's also a growing conversation around, can data really be used to make more objective decisions, identify talent that might be overlooked otherwise, and create more kind of fair, meritocratic labor markets.
Yeah, you write in your article, both skilled and unskilled workers are increasingly assessed and controlled not by human supervisors, but by opaque algorithms. Battle over the future of work aren't going to play out between machine and man. They will be between the workers who generate data and the people who are well positioned to leverage it. So if you could speak more specifically about just how this data will be used in the workplace, how might it be used in a specific industry, let's say?
Sure. For example, in like the high-tech industry, there's been a growing number of companies who have gone into the business of basically collecting information about the workforce and what individuals might have specific types of software development skills, for example. This is an area that's actually really ripe for big data analysis of various kinds, because a lot of the kinds of work that software developers do leaves a very large digital footprint. So if you're a coder, you're likely to participate in forums online where people are discussing, and answering questions about certain challenges they're encountering in their work. You also have public open code repositories where people make available prior projects they've worked on and things like this. And what we've seen is, especially in the last few years, a growing number of companies who basically are in the business of gathering that data, scraping it from the internet, and then compiling these large data repositories that try to encompass as many of the potential workers in the high-tech field as possible. Then what happens with that information is companies create dashboards and recommendation systems that recruiters and companies who are really trying to efficiently identify new talent can use to identify skilled workers of a certain kind, or people with certain kinds of characteristics they're looking for. That can range from highly technical things, such as being able to code in a specific language, to much more fuzzy concepts like your ability to work well in teams, your level of cooperativeness, things like that. So what we're really seeing happen is that this kind of because there's now so much data generated that can be kind of can fuel this type of recommendation system, it's really changing the way recruiters even kind of go about their workflow and thinking about identifying, especially employees at the top of the funnel. So these systems are being used to surface candidates that then recruiters can go out, reach out to, and tell about new job opportunities. Which is very different from what a lot of us are very familiar with, and that most of us think of jobs and the way that we seek job opportunities as being something where a company will post a job description and you're able to apply. What we're seeing with these recommendation systems is now recruiters and companies can focus much more targeted attention on specific candidates that they want to reach out to specifically, as opposed to just relying on a public job posting and soliciting applications from there.
Chelsea Barabas is our guest, and we're taking your calls about big data. If you live in the Eastern or Central time zones, call 202-748-8000. And if you're in the Mountain and Pacific time zones, call 202-748-8001. Now, Chelsea, what types of workers are most at risk, let's say, as employers leverage big data for their own benefit?
So, again, depending on if we're focusing on automation or these different types of evaluation tools, automation is really happening kind of across the gamut. Right now, what we're seeing in terms of kind of these automated decision-making and recommendation tools, we're seeing concentrations in a few specific industries. As I mentioned, my work is primarily focused on the high-tech sector, which was one in which the industry was growing and feeling the pains of feeling like the demand for skilled labor was outstripping the supply that they could find. So in industries like that, where there are chronic labor shortages, and we're seeing the pipeline of skilled work massively expanding, these types of systems are being used. I think another place this is has been used actually for quite a long time are actually also in low skilled work, work where you, for example, call centers. Call centers, most people who work in call centers, their calls are recorded and constantly monitored. They're held accountable to very, hourly metrics for how many people they've called, how many successful calls they've had, and then their pay or their promotion opportunities are based on those types of metrics that are fueled by digital data. And then I think a third really interesting area we're starting to see this increasingly are in areas of work where we're seeing digital platforms play a larger and larger role in kind of mediating interactions between customers and workers. So an interesting one might be the transportation sector. With the rise of companies like Uber and Lyft, taxi drivers now are generating far more data about their professional activity, everything from their professionalism on the job to the amount of work they do on a daily basis. This is really valuable information that these driving platforms can use as a basis for promotion, incentivization for certain kinds of behaviors, but also is really valuable data that could potentially be used for the worker to access different types of opportunities, such as, for example, the purchase of a new vehicle. If they want to be able to finance the purchase of a large asset, hypothetically, this type of professional data could be used to give insights into their cash flow, their productivity, and their level of professionalism, which could fuel into new opportunities, new doors opening up for them.
Another point that struck me that you mentioned in your piece, you write that big data comes with all the biases of its creators. And you write, for example, one team of data analysts I interviewed was proud to have discovered that individuals who listed Lord of the Rings as one of their favorite books on Facebook were more likely to be hired as successful CTOs in tech companies. This insight helped determine which candidates were recommended for certain high-ranking jobs. But the type of people who fit this profile of an ideal CTO are also likely to reflect the demographics of the folks who currently hold those positions in the tech industry, which means that these metrics tend to simply reveal who is already in power rather than finding people who are truly best equipped for the job. Is there a way to mitigate that?
I think so. I think we're right on at the beginning of these kinds of conversations. So I think, the early hope of big data, a lot of the conversation was focused on this hope that we could achieve more objective metrics for basing decisions on. So could we, eliminate some of these sticky implicit biases that have plagued our society forever? What we found, though, is that actually, the data that we generate reflects the world that we live in, and this world is, we have vastly different experiences according to our background and certain, key demographic features. And so if we don't, take that into consideration, what we run the risk of doing is basically just replicating the existing biases that we see already in the world today. The tech sector is a great example of this, which is where that example is drawn from. Yeah, the tech sector over the last few years has taken a lot of heat for really not being very diverse, being a largely white, largely male industry at this point, especially on the engineering side of things. As a result, if you were to develop a recommendation system, looking for key attributes and characteristics that might indicate who's going to be a good CTO, those characteristics are likely going to be, skewed toward the people who are already in those positions. And if most of those people are white men, then white men are more likely to come back. Now, this is tricky because, the way we sometimes look at this is thinking, well, okay, what if we eliminate race? What if we eliminate gender explicitly from the equation? Then, we can somehow, take that out as a biasing factor. The trick with that is, though, that there are a lot of ways that race and gender, class can get double encoded in variables that you might not think would have anything to do with those things. So, for example, zip code is a really important indicator oftentimes of race because our cities tend to be fairly segregated along racial lines. So if you include something like a zip code in your algorithm for predicting who might be a good CEO of a company, you're likely encoding some bias that's going to be connected to race as well.
Let's take a few calls. We have John calling in from Niles, Illinois. Good morning.
Good morning, and thanks for C-SPAN again. Chelsea, I'm a college administrator working in the career field with journalism students, and I'd really be interested in what you found regarding LinkedIn and specific social media that we use with students for new grads and recent grads, in addition to mid-level people, what you think about LinkedIn and how that's being used. LinkedIn has been a massive platform for recruiters and sourcing talent. And again, I think what's really interesting is figuring out what information is made available on these sites and how does that shape the decisions that are being made. I think another really interesting area to kind of look at this is actually university college admissions. So the way that applications are structured, the digital dashboard that selections committees use in order to review candidates, rank them, and give them various scores are really important in shaping who ends up getting in and who doesn't. That's very similar for LinkedIn. LinkedIn is, definitely the most dominant kind of professional network available, and a lot of recruiters use that to find new talent. I haven't done a lot of work specifically focusing on that, so I can't say anything too specific about, the information that's available to it, other than I think it's probably very influential and important area these days.
And Chelsea, so you mentioned that the big data algorithms have the power to sort people into piles of, worthy and unworthy. So it kind of begs the question, how regulated are the groups that collect and sort the data?
Right now, really not very regulated at all. I think the kind of the precedent for this kind of work and this kind of scoring really comes from the Fair Credit Reporting Act and trying to regulate credit reporting agencies. But credit reporting agency is a very specific kind of classification that really only is relevant or is only connected to the credit reporting agencies as we've traditionally understood them. But what we've seen is these very quickly expanding group of kind of third-party companies who do credit reporting like activity for a much broader set of things, a much broader set of consumer scoring activity. And right now, those aren't really regulated under any specific law or regulation. But I think we can draw from the Fair Credit Reporting Act as a really useful precedent to think about how we might regulate these things in the future and why that might be important. So for example, when credit reporting really started in the mid-20th century, some of the challenges of it, particularly for consumers, was their information was being gathered and sold to companies, potential employers, and then those scores were being used as the basis for making decisions. But there was no obligation from either the credit reporting agency or the person who was making the decision, whether it be a potential employer, a potential creditor, to inform you that your credit score had been used to make that decision. So if you were denied an opportunity based on your credit score, you really had no way of knowing that that was the case. If there was inaccurate information in your credit score, you had no way of checking that. You had no way of contesting the decision that was made or fixing the record. The Fair Credit Reporting Act was really created to create a due process framework to protect us as consumers and give us the opportunity to, one, be notified when decisions were made on our behalf based on information that was collected. Two, get access to that information, so to get access to our credit scores, review the information that was compiled about us. And three, to really contest either the accuracy of the information that was included in the report, or contest the basis of the type of decision that was made on your behalf using that information. I think we could borrow that framework and think about that similarly in this era of big data and algorithms, thinking about notification, access to your personal information that's been used, and then processes for contesting those decisions and checking for biases and discriminatory practices that might be built on top of them.
Okay. We've got John on the line. He's calling in from Rehoboth, Massachusetts. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you folks today?
Great, thanks. What's on your mind?
Good.
Well, I kind of have I had a software company that did some early on large database things, and actually did some consulting for one of the big recruiting database systems prior to the LinkedIn things. And the whole notion that big data is kind of doing anything that's particularly good, and particularly the systems that were built to parse and look at large systems have been sort of centralized into a couple of large companies. And the whole idea of personal computers and individual liberty and all these kind of things were kind of thrown out the window. I mean, we designed a whole lot of systems to be able to make information available to people on an individual level, to get away from mainframes controlling centralized control of the machines. But unfortunately, people give their data to these big systems, and they put themselves in a thing where people make sort of groupthink ideas about things. And whether you talk about software engineers with specific talents on LinkedIn, and hiring people on job performance instead of people with open source and people who really know the engineering, it's one thing. I mean, you have to understand that. I'll give you an example. LinkedIn recently was bought out and went public. Was bought out by Microsoft, where essentially the stock price of LinkedIn was up, I don't remember, 43%. Just take it as a number. That's probably about right. So here was billions of dollars that was printed to get LinkedIn over to Microsoft, who controlled a lot of the technology for going things. And this is kind of how it works. And what happened was when the initial IPOs for LinkedIn went out, they limited it out to very few people. And it's if you hire from LinkedIn, you're only going to get certain kinds of corporate people and people that think a certain way. And this is atypical, and it kind of really stops innovation. And if you look at where the innovation comes from in the tech industry, a lot of it comes from overseas engineers and things like this, because they had to learn the systems from the ground up.
Care to weigh in there, Chelsea?
Sorry?
Would you care to weigh in?
Do I want to weigh in there?
Yes.
Sure. I'm just trying to draw out a specific thing to respond to. Perhaps, I mean, you said a lot of things in there. I'm not really sure what to say to that, honestly. I mean,
Let's move ahead.
There's a lot there.
Sure.
Okay.
Let's go to
Yeah.
Al calling in from Warren, Ohio. Good morning.
Well, we definitely don't need marijuana smoking in the United States, that's for sure. I got two questions. First question on the magazines. Now, when you got this here spotlight on the magazines and they get your information now, they could sell it to other people? I actually got two questions, one for C-SPAN.
Okay.
But can they sell that information to other companies that had nothing to do with magazines? And the second question is C-SPAN going to talk about the wiretapping on Donald Trump from previous president, Mr. Obama? Because tomorrow's going to be a good day. Thank you.
I believe we have that conversation coming up tomorrow morning. But to your earlier point, Chelsea, can companies sell the information that they gather on people?
Yes. In a lot of cases, that's definitely true. There are very large secondary markets for the buying and selling of data. Either from third parties who've collected it or from services that you've used online. In many cases, those services have the rights to your data and can really do whatever they want with it, whether it be use it for their internal purposes or sell it. Particularly if a company goes bankrupt, oftentimes, if they're a digital company, their data is their most valuable asset. They might sell that data in order to recover some of their costs or debt.
Okay, and let's move ahead to Jack calling in from Davenport, Iowa. What's on your mind?
Yes, you talked a little bit about, sexism and stuff. In the use of video games, do people collect data on what the ratio is of men to women that play video games?
I don't know a lot about that area, but I do know that there are some there is some interesting work being done about, the changing demographics of video game players. I think particularly around gender. I'm not 100% on this, but I think young girls are actually the largest growing demographic of video game players. I'm not sure where that data is collected, but because video games are by their nature digital, I'm sure there's a lot of information that is produced. It would be very interesting to figure out who harvests and collects that data, but I'm not very familiar with that particular industry.
Chelsea Barabas is our guest this morning. She's the head of social innovation and digital currency, head of social innovation for the Digital Currency Initiative at MIT Media Lab. We're speaking about her piece in Democracy Journal. Chelsea, thanks so much for your time this morning.
Yeah, thank you.